Say the number $37 billion out loud and let it sit in your mind for a moment. That is the precise figure Russia poured into its Black Sea fleet over the past 2 decades. Not 37 billion in vague accounting estimates or optimistic projections, but 37 billion in actual procurement contracts. Commissioned warships, advanced radar arrays, and layered air defense installations. 37 billion in guided missile frigates, hovercraft corvettes, hardened port bunkers, and command infrastructure at Sevastopol. 37 billion building what Moscow was absolutely certain would be an untouchable regional naval power, a force capable of projecting Russian authority across every square kilometer of the Black Sea without serious challenge from any adversary, and then a country that barely had a functioning navy when this war started began hunting it, drone by drone, strike by strike, ship by ship, and it has not stopped. What we are about to walk through is not the story of one attack or one burning warship on one dramatic night. It is the story of the most comprehensive dismantling of a major naval power in the modern era, and it is happening not with aircraft carriers or submarine fleets or any of the conventional instruments that naval warfare has historically revolved around. It is happening with unmanned systems that cost a fraction of a percent of what they are destroying. The May 23rd strike on Novorossiysk is the latest and most complete chapter in that story, and understanding what happened that night, why it happened, and why Russia could not stop it, requires starting from the very beginning. Russia entered February 2022 with what appeared on paper to be an overwhelming maritime advantage in the Black Sea theater. The flagship of the fleet was the Moskva, a guided missile cruiser carrying 16 anti-ship cruise missiles and a crew of nearly 500 sailors and officers below the Moskva set guided. Missile frigates, a dozen or more corvettes, submarine platforms, amphibious landing ships, mine warfare vessels, and a substantial operational support fleet. Russia did not merely have a presence in the Black Sea at the start of 2022. Russia owned it, and every strategic planner in Moscow knew it. The Moskva went first, in April 2022, struck by 2 Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missiles and consumed by fire before sinking beneath the surface with the loss of dozens of crew members. The strategic impact of that single sinking was immediate and disproportionate. To the loss of one vessel, Russia's amphibious forces, which had been massing south of Odessa and threatening a coastal landing operation that would have fundamentally changed the southern front, pulled back overnight. One ship, 2 missiles, and the entire calculus of the war's maritime dimension shifted in a single evening. But the Moskva was only the opening act of something far larger and far more methodical than any single dramatic strike. What followed was a years-long campaign of attrition that the daily news cycle was structurally incapable of following properly because it unfolded too gradually for any individual moment to seem decisive. The accumulated effect, however, has been exactly that. The fleet that Russia spent $37 billion building is being unmade asset by asset, port by port, and no Russian response has slowed it. The first question that demands a proper answer is how Ukraine is doing this at all. How does a country with no blue water navy and no conventional maritime strike capacity reach targets inside heavily defended Russian naval ports hundreds of kilometers from the nearest Ukrainian-controlled territory? The answer has 3 interlocking components, and each one is essential to understanding why Russia has been unable to stop any of it. The first component is intelligence architecture. Ukraine has built, with Western technical assistance and its own considerable ingenuity, a remarkably comprehensive real-time picture of Russian naval movements, berth assignments, maintenance schedules, and defensive postures across the entire theater, satellite imagery, signals, intelligence, human intelligence from occupied territories, and systematic open-source monitoring give Ukrainian operational planners situational awareness over Russian naval bases that Moscow genuinely did not believe any adversary could achieve. When a ship like the Admiral Essen is sitting in a maintenance berth with its active defense systems partially powered down for servicing, Ukraine knows that fact, and Ukraine times its strikes to arrive precisely when that window of reduced defensive capability is open. The second component is navigation technology that has moved from classified military capability to operational reality in less than 5 years. Ukrainian maritime drones use a combination of inertial navigation systems, terrain-following algorithms adapted for low-altitude maritime environments, and optical terminal guidance that allows the drone to identify and lock onto its specific target visually during the final approach phase, a system that travels 300 kilometers. At 50 feet above the water surface to avoid radar detection, then homes in on a specific ship in a crowded military port using visual recognition would have been described as theoretical science fiction 15 years ago. Ukraine has made that capability routine operational practice. The third component is perhaps the most strategically significant of all, and it is the one that explains why each successive Ukrainian strike becomes slightly more likely to succeed than the one before it. Ukraine has spent 2 years systematically hunting Russian radar installations, air defense batteries, and electronic warfare jamming systems across the entire theater. Each Russian air defense system destroyed creates a gap in Russia's detection coverage over the Black Sea. Each gap is mapped by Ukrainian intelligence. Each mapped gap becomes a routing corridor for the next wave of drones approaching their targets. The process is self-reinforcing in a way that structurally favors Ukraine with every iteration. Russia destroys a Ukrainian drone and repairs an air defense system. Ukraine destroys that air defense system, and now Russia has both fewer interceptors available and a wider radar gap than it had before. The cycle turns and Ukraine wins each iteration by a slightly larger margin than the last. The second question that demands a serious answer is why Russia, despite spending billions on the most sophisticated air defense systems available to it, has failed to stop a single coordinated Ukrainian drone strike on its naval assets. Russia's S-400, Pantsir S-1, and Tor M2 systems are formidable hardware by every technical specification, but they were designed, funded, procured, and operationally calibrated to defeat a specific category of threats: manned aircraft, cruise missiles with large radar signatures, ballistic warheads approaching from altitude. The radar cross-section of a fighter jet is orders of magnitude larger than a compact fixed-wing autonomous vehicle flying 50 feet above the water at reduced speed. Systems whose detection algorithms are calibrated for large, fast targets are structurally mismatched against small, slow ones that hug the surface below the radar horizon. The physics work against Russia in a way that cannot be corrected by deploying more of the same equipment. The second reason Russia's air defenses are failing is the mathematics of swarm density. Ukraine does not attack with 1 or 2 drones that a defending system can engage sequentially. It attacks in coordinated waves of dozens or hundreds arriving simultaneously from multiple vectors and multiple altitudes. Every air defense system has a finite engagement capacity, a ceiling on how many simultaneous threats it can track, prioritize, and fire upon before its engagement queue overflows. Overwhelm that capacity with a sufficiently large swarm, and some percentage of the incoming wave will always penetrate to its target. Ukraine has mastered the arithmetic of that saturation threshold and applies it consistently. The third reason is institutional, and in many ways it is the most consequential of all because it cannot be fixed by any procurement decision or technical upgrade. Russia's highly centralized military command culture means that when a drone swarm appears on radar at 2 in the morning, the officer on duty does not have the authority to make independent engagement decisions within his own judgment. He waits for authorization from above. In the seconds that process requires, the drones close the remaining distance to their targets. NATO-trained officers operate under mission command doctrine, explicitly empowered to act within the commander's stated intent without waiting for specific authorization for each decision. The difference in response time between these two institutional cultures is not a marginal tactical detail. In the context of a drone swarm traveling at speed toward a stationary target, it is often the precise difference between successful interception and successful impact. Now let us examine the specific strike of May 23rd in the detail it deserves, because this particular operation represents the most comprehensive single-night execution of Ukraine's naval campaign to date. The location was Novorossiysk, and the choice of location carries its own strategic meaning that must be understood before the strike itself can be properly assessed. Novorossiysk is not a secondary or fallback port that Russia uses for overflow capacity. It is Russia's primary Black Sea Fleet operational base as of this moment, the harbor to which Moscow relocated its most valuable remaining naval assets after repeated Ukrainian strikes made continued operations out of Sevastopol militarily untenable. Think carefully about what that relocation represents in strategic terms. Russia was driven from Sevastopol, the base that Putin personally used as the defining symbol of Russian permanence in Crimea after the 2014 annexation, by drone and missile strikes that accumulated pressure until continued presence became more costly than withdrawal. Russia retreated several hundred kilometers east to Novorossiysk, believing that the additional distance would provide meaningful operational protection. Ukraine followed the fleet there and began striking it again without meaningful interruption. The drone crews responsible for the May 23 operation came from three professional unmanned aviation units: the 9th Kyrie's Battalion, the 412th Nemesis Brigade, and the 414th Unmanned Strike Aviation Brigade. These are not improvised volunteer formations operating on enthusiasm and ingenuity. They are professional. Military units with years of accumulated operational experience, institutional doctrine refined across hundreds of missions, and the kind of organizational knowledge that only genuine combat repetition produces. The mission on May 23 was designed to attack multiple simultaneous target categories, forcing Russian defenders to divide their finite defensive resources across competing threat streams rather than concentrating them against any single approach. Primary naval vessels were targeted alongside port infrastructure, energy storage facilities, and the air defense systems protecting the base itself. Everything sustaining Novorossiysk as a functioning military installation was placed on the target list simultaneously. Russia's defenders had to respond to all of it at once with the same equipment and the same personnel. By every available account, they stopped none of it. The primary naval target of the May 23 strike was the Admiral Essen, one of only 6 Project 11,356 guided missile frigates Russia has ever constructed. And understanding this specific vessel is essential to understanding what Russia has lost and continues to lose. The Admiral Essen was commissioned into the Black Sea Fleet in 2016, making it one of the newer major surface combatants in Russia's regional inventory. It displaces approximately 4,000 metric tons at full load, stretches 125 meters from bow to stern, sustains speeds of 30 knots, and carries a crew of around 200 sailors and officers. The weapons suite was designed to make this frigate a genuine multi-mission threat platform capable of engaging targets on land, at sea, and in the air simultaneously. 8 vertical launch cells for caliber cruise missiles with a range exceeding 1,500 kilometers, 24 surface-to-air missiles for area air defense, twin torpedo tubes, a 100mm naval gun, an embarked Kamov Ka-27 helicopter for anti-submarine warfare operations, and the Mineral M over-the-horizon targeting radar that allows the ship to engage targets it cannot directly observe. On paper, this is a capable modern multi-role warship of the kind that a decade ago would have been considered a serious and largely self-sufficient combat platform. The acquisition cost for each project 11,356 hull runs between $450 million and $500 million, $500 million per ship. The second major target that night was a Project 1239 Savage-class hovercraft corvette, only 2 of which have ever been constructed anywhere in the world. These vessels ride on an air cushion rather than a conventional displacement hull, achieving speeds up to 55 knots, nearly double the frigate's maximum velocity. Though they are lightly crewed with approximately 35 personnel, both vessels were sitting in their berths at Novorossiysk when the drones arrived. Stationary, precisely located, fully targeted. Here is where the story moves from impressive to almost incomprehensible from any rational military planning perspective. The May 23 attack on the Admiral Essen was not the first strike on this vessel. It was not the second strike or the third. The May 23 strike was the 4th time in 5 months that Ukrainian forces struck the same $500 million warship in the same port. Let us walk through the complete sequence of those 4 attacks, because the pattern reveals something about Russian institutional decision-making that is as strategically consequential as the physical damage to the hull. In March 2026, the first major strike hit the Admiral Essen superstructure, igniting a fire that burned continuously for 18 hours before Russian damage control teams brought it under control. The Kashtan-Close-in weapon system, the ship's last-ditch point defense against incoming projectiles, was damaged in the strike. The TK-25 electronic warfare complex responsible for jamming and deceiving the guidance systems of incoming threats was struck and operationally degraded. Multiple radar arrays were destroyed or severely impaired in ways that would require extensive dry dock maintenance to restore when the fire was finally extinguished. The Admiral Essen could not effectively launch its caliber cruise missiles, could not adequately defend itself against further attack, and represented not a combat asset but a floating liability consuming port resources and personnel. Russia's institutional response to that condition was to leave the ship exactly where it was. The air defenses around Novorossiysk were not meaningfully reinforced in the weeks following the March strike. No credible additional countermeasures appear to have been deployed to address the evident vulnerability. The ship remained in the same berth, in the same port, in the same condition that had made it a target, and in April, Ukraine came back. The April strike targeted the bow section specifically, striking the sonar dome, an extraordinarily delicate precision instrument that cannot be armored without negating its entire acoustic detection function. Propulsion systems were degraded to the point where the Admiral Essen lost meaningful independent mobility. A ship that cannot move is a ship that will remain exactly where the targeting package says it will be on the next strike, which it was, and then the third strike came. And then the fourth, on May 23rd, against a vessel that Russia had 4 separate opportunities to relocate, protect more effectively, move to a facility with superior defensive coverage, or remove from service entirely to prevent continued intelligence value from its predictable position for opportunities to learn and adapt. Were opportunities squandered without visible adjustment, that is not a military organization suffering from bad luck in an inherently unpredictable operational environment. That is a military organization suffering from a fundamental institutional failure of adaptive response that no amount of additional hardware can correct. The damage from May 23rd extended far beyond the 2 warships that represented the headline targets of the operation, and the full scope of what was struck that single night reveals the true ambition of Ukraine's targeting architecture. An OSA surface-to-air missile system in Donetsk was destroyed, approximately $10 million of air defense capability eliminated, and more critically from an operational planning perspective, another gap opened in Russia's already compromised detection coverage. A rear logistics base and support hub for Russia's 6th Air Defense Army in Rivne, Luhansk region, was struck and destroyed. This is deep rear infrastructure, the kind of target that does not generate dramatic imagery of burning warships but whose destruction degrades the combat units it supplies in ways that accumulate invisibly across weeks and months, destroy the logistics spine, and the combat units it feeds begin to degrade, not dramatically in a single night but steadily and persistently in ways that eventually become decisive. A drone command post in Kherson Oblast was targeted specifically because Ukraine has developed a systematic doctrine of hunting Russian drone command infrastructure at its planning and coordination level. Eliminating the organizational brain of a drone unit degrades its operational effectiveness far more efficiently than attempting to intercept individual drones after they are already in flight. Fuel tankers and armored vehicles in Zaporizhia were struck, and the significance of fuel interdiction deserves more analytical attention than it typically receives in strike-by-strike coverage. Fuel is the physical lifeblood of every mechanized military operation at every scale. Every fuel tanker that burns is a precise calculation. At the front, about how many kilometers a tank can travel before it runs dry, how many sorties an attack helicopter can complete before it lands with empty tanks. The effects of systematic fuel interdiction are invisible in any single strike, but accumulated across thousands of strikes over months and years, they become operationally decisive in ways that the cumulative records confirm. And then there were the 2 oil terminals at Novorossiysk itself, the Sheskuris and the Grushavia. The Grushavia is not merely a significant fuel storage facility, it is the largest petroleum storage installation in the entire Caucasus region, with a holding capacity of 1.2 million metric tons of fuel. When the Grushavia burns, it does not merely damage Russian energy infrastructure in an abstract strategic sense, it disrupts the military fuel supply chain serving the entire southern theater of operations in ways that reach every mechanized unit drawing on that supply, all of this in a single coordinated night operation. All of it planned with precision intelligence, executed by professional crews, and successful against air defenses that Russia spent decades and billions of dollars acquiring. The contradiction that this creates for Russia's official narrative deserves direct examination because it defines the fundamental tension at the heart of how this war is being perceived inside Russia itself. On one hand, Russian state media and official military communications continue presenting a picture of an army advancing, purposefully absorbing Ukrainian resistance and moving steadily toward its stated objectives. The intelligence architecture supporting the targeting process is being continuously refined with each new source of information and each new analytical tool Ukraine develops or receives from partners. Ukraine is not pausing to consolidate what it has already accomplished. It is actively asking what the next generation of this campaign looks like. Here is what this entire analysis points toward, stated with the directness that 3 years of consistent evidence now justifies. The May 23rd strike on Novorossiysk was not a remarkable departure from the established pattern of this campaign. It was the most comprehensive single-night execution of a campaign that has already changed the strategic balance in the Black Sea in ways that cannot be reversed by any Russian response currently available. Russia entered this war with a fleet built over 2 decades at a cost of $37 billion. That fleet has been systematically eliminated, not in a dramatic clash of warships maneuvering against each other on the open sea, but in port by unmanned systems at cost ratios so disproportionately favorable to Ukraine that no rational military economic analysis can describe the exchange as anything other than catastrophic for Russia. The total Ukrainian investment in this naval campaign amounts to perhaps a few $100 million across 3 years of operations against $37 billion of Russian construction, maintenance, and operational expenditure. That asymmetry is not a tactical imbalance that can be corrected by repairing the Admiral Essen one more time, reinforcing Novorossiysk's perimeter defenses, or deploying additional Panzer batteries to cover the port approaches. The asymmetry is structural, rooted in the fundamental economics and physics of unmanned versus manned systems, cheap versus expensive platforms, and distributed versus concentrated force architecture. No incremental Russian investment within the time scales of this war can reverse that structural asymmetry because the investment required to do so would exceed the value of what is being protected. What Ukraine has accomplished in the Black Sea will be studied in naval staff colleges on every continent for decades. It will shape procurement priorities, doctrine revisions, and force structure decisions across every major navy that takes its mission seriously. The lesson it teaches is precise and unambiguous. Russia is living that lesson right now, in real time, one fireball at a time, $1.5 billion hull degraded by $200,000 worth of drones at a time. After May 23rd, the commander whose forces executed the strike delivered an assessment of Russia's remaining Black Sea fleet that was not rhetoric or psychological warfare. It was the logical conclusion of a 3-year mathematical proof. You are doomed. You cannot hide. The $37 billion is gone, and the fleet it built is finished.